Brujeria isn't demonized because it's dangerous. It's demonized because your brain reads it as a threat. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Dr. Bianca Flores. I have my PhD in neuroscience and I love everything metaphysical. I want to acknowledge up front that there's a lot of colonized aspects that have gone into demonizing folk practices and brujeria, and I'm going to get to that at the end, but I just want to talk about the neuroscience of why people think witchcraft or brujeria is a problem. When you're working in the metaphysical, doing brujeria, witchcraft, any sort of spiritual work, from a neuroscience perspective, it involves a lot of ritual, vagus nerve stimulation, meditation, prayer, candle work, etc. Even using symbolic tools like eggs, herbs, and candles can help introduce a sense of nervous system regulation. These practices activate the parasympathetic nervous system so that you can shift your nervous system from a state of freeze, flight, or fight to a resting state. Additionally, these practices can also increase interoception, meaning your brain's body awareness, emotional self-regulation, and overall strengthen meaning-making networks in the brain. So as a whole, whatever you practice, whether it's your particular culture is folk magic, brujeria, whatever, essentially what it is psychological self-regulation that's paired with cultural symbolism. Here's what these practices are not. These are not mind control. This is not demonic by default, and it's certainly not supernatural harm casting. Just like anything, it's a tool. However, these negative connotations can come from fear-based misclassifications. Whatever your brain doesn't understand, it will classify it as a threat. Humans evolved to survive in tribes. Anything that was external to that was considered a threat. Anything internal was considered safe. This is driven by your amygdala, the threat and fear detection, as well as salience networks in the brain and social pattern recognition. So when someone sees symbols or rituals that are external to them or that they're unfamiliar with, your brain might automatically categorize it as a threat. And if it's not checked, it can become fear, panic, anxiety. However, these kinds of practices that are involved in brujeria or folk practice magic, whatever your practice is, it doesn't threaten you, it threatens worldviews. It can challenge colonial and Western narratives of Western superiority and identity. Ultimately, when these belief systems are challenged, the brain can perceive it as a threat. That's why people tend to react emotionally and instead of logically. Working in the metaphysical invites shadow work, accountability, emotional self-regulation, and even emotional truth. However, the brain does prefer cognitive consistencies. When any sort of spiritual work you're doing kind of nags at you to dig deeper, to understand those behavioral patterns you have, to understand what that inconsistency might be, that's where the breakthroughs happen. The piece that can create cognitive dissonance, and it's easier for the brain to classify that as a threat rather than try to change the narrative. I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of stigma associated with traditional practices from colonial systems. And colonial systems didn't invent this fear, they exploited it. Fear made control easier, and repetition made it feel true. And anything that teaches people to reclaim that internal authority and help regulate themselves is always going to challenge a system that survives on external control. As always, don't forget to stay connected, stay curious, and always trust your gut.